us. As we always do before we get started, we just want to thank you all for the support. It really means a lot. Everybody from the Search for Huru team who has been supporting us over the years. Thank you so much. Make sure you guys go to dynastamir.com. Again, go to dynastamir.com. While you're there, hold on, I got the new release. Where's my book at? Where did it go? It's around here somewhere. It's okay. We'll just put up one of the old releases. There we go. Kinky hair is kingly hair, you guys. There we go. There we go. Kinky hair is kingly hair. Make sure you guys go cop a book. Also, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the content. And then while you're at dynastamir.com, make sure you join the email list so you guys can stay up to date in regards to what's going on with the platform. Also, become a monthly Patreon. Become a monthly Patreon. Patreon.com. Search for Huru. And without further ado, we have our brother on today, Ebube Okoli. And we're going to discuss what the diaspora can expect in the next 10 years when it comes to Africa. Like, what can they expect? Like, what's going on? What changes are happening? There has to be changes in leadership because, like, it's the old guard is, they're going to be old. So, what can we expect when it comes to leadership? If it's going to be progressiveness, how is these next 10 years going to look on the continent, and why our brothers should be getting involved in some type of way, form, and fashion when it comes to Africa. So, brother, go ahead, introduce yourself, and we'll jump right into it.
Sure thing. For those who don't know me, my name is Ebube Okoli. For those who do know me, it's good to see you again. Now, I'm a Nigerian-born, American-trained attorney and geopolitical analyst. I'm also the host of Up Close and Center. That's a channel here on YouTube that does short geopolitical analysis. So if you haven't gone to Up Close and Center, you'll know you're there because the logo is black and the lettering is white. Now, it's geopolitical analysis that doesn't have the same bias as some of the larger media houses when dealing with African issues or things that affect Africans. So if you haven't already subscribed, go to Up Close and Center and subscribe now. Also hit the notification bell icon so that you'll be alerted when new content becomes available. So far, everyone who's subscribed has loved the content.
Oh, great.
Appreciate it. I do appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And so go ahead and subscribe and also hit the notification bell icon. More content is coming, and it's going to be very in-depth. It's going to be explained in a simple way where you don't need much backstory to really understand the analysis that's being displayed.
Hey, Booba, I got a good question for you, and this is a little bit off topic, but it kind of goes with the topic a little bit. So my friends in Sacramento, they have this chat. We have this group chat. Just pretty much we all grew up together in Sacramento, and so I'm the only one in it that's really pro-African and Africa is the future, and they're just like, nah, we American. So they sent these articles saying that Nigeria has 23 million homeless people, and they're like, see, Dynasty, see, right, exactly. And so I have to explain to them, like, in Africa, like, the culture is like, literally, this is a true story. When I was in Senegal, me and my buddies were walking around. I just got hungry. I was hungry as hell. Like, literally, we went to somebody's random house that we didn't know. They let us in and we ate. And so I tell them, like, you rarely see someone homeless sleeping outside in Africa because people just don't operate like that. But it's like, nah. See, CNN.com. So how would you address that?
When we talk about homelessness, that only happens when you've been detached from your root, where there's nowhere you can go back to. And when we look at homelessness, we don't really see that much in Africa because the culture is that, let's say you move from your village in Kebbi or Kogi State, and you move down to Lagos for greener opportunities, and it doesn't work out for you. You get evicted, you can't afford to pay your landlord. You can always go back to where you're from, meaning you can go back to Kogi State, to your village, to your father or your grandfather's compound, and you can stay there. It may not be the most luxurious place. The people in your village may look at you like, why'd you come back without anything? But at least you have somewhere to go. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about homelessness, you don't really see homelessness. Now, if you do see somebody walking the streets homeless in, for example, Nigeria, that's typically due to mental illness. That person is mentally ill. And 23 million people, that's the size of a small country. So did they say the number was 23 million?
It was 23 million.
That's almost 10%. That's 13% of the nation.
Right.
So they're saying that 13% of the nation, which is also the population, 13% of the population is not homeless in Nigeria. So that highlights some of the problems that occur when we get our analysis from some of the larger media houses. They put out things that aren't true in a lot of ways because they really don't understand the African continent, nor do they really choose to understand the African continent. In my culture, we have something called the danger of one story. And whatever their agenda is, they like to promote the one story about Africans just being poor and destitute and unable to help themselves. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Right. So I'm glad you addressed that, but let's go ahead and jump into the topic. What can we expect in the next 10 years? Let's start off with leadership. Because we just had the uprising in Mali. We just had the uprising. Well, people are saying that what's going on in Cote d'Ivoire could be a little volatile because I think the current president is seeking a third term, and we'll see how that plays out. So what can we expect when it comes to leadership in Africa? I know that's kind of vague and abstract, but we keep some countries, we keep having coup after coup, whether it be Mali, and then you have other countries, like Cote d'Ivoire, where these old leaders don't want to leave, and then you have the situation in Cameroon, Guinea, was it Equatorial Guinea? I'm trying to think of Togo. Like you have these leaders that just don't want to go anywhere. Right, exactly. What can we expect in the next 10 years?
All right, now I'll address the first problem is that a lot of leaders stay put because they fail to put strong systems in place. So they rely on strongman tactics, meaning I have to be here directly, right? And if you understand real power works behind the scenes. You push somebody in front to essentially take the arrows and be the front person of a larger system that's running behind the scenes. And regardless of who's the front person or the spokesman of the system, power remains with those who control the system. So a lot of African leaders haven't set up systems, so they have to just sit there literally until they die, because if they leave, they've essentially lost all power. So they're still playing strongman politics, which is actually the weakest form of power. So that's why you have leaders trying to stay there literally until they drop dead. Now, in regards to what we can expect from leaders on the African continent this decade, 2020 to 2030, we have to realize a very interesting phenomenon is occurring. We have something called the third generational leader. Now, in Africa. Now, the first generational leaders were the Africans who were directly responsible for getting Africa its independence from the European powers. Mm-hmm. So those guys, they came, many of them, the Patrice Lumumbas, many of those leaders had a lot of problems because a lot of them saw a vision for the nation that the colonial administrators didn't necessarily like. So you had the first generational leaders were the leaders who were directly responsible for pulling their nations away from colonialism. Mm-hmm. Along the way, we got the second generational leaders, who were the leaders who weren't necessarily there during independence. They were in their 20s, 30s, and some their 40s. What we have in Africa is a hangover of the second generational leaders. This decade, many of those second generational leaders are going into their 70s, if they're not already there already. Right. Their 80s. Mm-hmm. Some are even going into their 90s. They're not going to be ruling for much more than that, if at all. So what we're going to see, like the president of Ethiopia, for example, is a third generational leader. He's in his 40s, a very young man, very dynamic, and he's come with a new set of ideas, a fresh way of thinking and seeing things, and he's very effective despite all the criticism. Now, there are criticisms against his administration, like every administration, and there should be criticisms against any administration because no administration is perfect. And if there's no criticism of that administration, then that says something in and of itself.
Right.
Where you can't criticize your leaders. So now what we're having is the phenomenon of the third generational leaders that are emerging, that are really going to do right by the continent, because we've seen what incompetent leadership has done to Africa. Now, it's not that every single leader is incompetent, but we have had some bad leaders that weren't out for the interest of the nation. They were out for the interest of their personal accumulation of wealth, if you will. Allegedly.
Right.
But now we're starting to see that maybe that's not the right direction to take. Maybe that's not the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, Dynast, if you allow your house to be dirty and messed up, you have to turn off the lights and go to sleep in that environment.
Right.
So we're seeing that there's a limit to how much you can allow your country to rot, and when things go bad, you run to Europe or run to America. Those days are fast.
Cote d'Ivoire. For some reason, they run to Cote d'Ivoire. I don't know why. All the dictators.
Well, that's just how it happens.
Right.
The thing about Cote d'Ivoire is a very developed state. It's very, especially Abidjan. Abidjan's a very developed place. So a lot of West Africans, especially when they get into trouble, they like that place because it's neutral and it's developed. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the third generational leaders in their 30s and their 40s, are finally emerging and taking the place. Now, many of the African leaders, once again, didn't want to relinquish the power because Africa practices a form of strongman politics, where rather than having strong institutions, you have strong personalities, and they essentially lead. So one of the beautiful things about the African continent this generation is that the third generational leaders are finally beginning to emerge. And that's really going to pivot and position Africa to be in the best possible shape moving forward.
Okay. So someone in the chat room says Ethiopia's prime minister is a dictator in the making, one of the worst we ever had. Any thoughts on that? Are you familiar? Are you up on the prime minister? I thought the prime minister of Ethiopia was a woman. So
the president. They have a prime minister president situation. I'm talking about Abiy Ahmed, the actual president of the nation. Yeah, and see, that's why I there was a caveat. I talked about the criticism, because there's a lot of criticism against his administration, and most of his criticism actually comes from inside of the nation. So he needs to figure out, and he needs to dialogue and figure out why there's that visceral reaction to him inside of the country, and he needs to deal with that squarely. Because outside the nation, he's praised, but inside of his nation, he's having the most problems, which means that there are unresolved issues there, that if he truly wants to have the type of administration that he envisions, he needs to resolve those issues.
So in the chat room brings up a great point. Many of the first generational leaders after colonialism were assassinated. Nkrumah, Lumumba, Sankara. You got your boy in Guinea-Bissau. What's his name? He's right here.
It moved me as well. I have his picture in my head. Yeah,
with glasses of what's his name? Amilcar Cabral. Yeah, you have him.
So many.
Yeah,
almost too many to name. You can just name the big ones, but you see, unfortunately, that led to a whole wave of leadership where some people who actually wanted to make change and properly position their nations where they felt those nations should be, shied away from leadership. Because if you see Patrice Lumumba, look who emerged directly after him.
Yeah.
Some of the second generational leaders were some of the, on paper, some of the worst leaders we had. And we're still dealing with the second generational leadership class. We're actually applauding the emergence of the third generation, because the third generational set of leaders are the group that's actually going to position Africa where it needs to be, because we lived under the second generational leaders who didn't necessarily position Africa to be in the best position for growth and advancement in this century.
Okay. All right, so we looked at leadership. Let's kind of take a deep dive into Nigeria. 2023. You got Peter Obi. They're saying Tinubu, the godfather of Legos, might run. Let's see who else. Those are the two big ones.
You have a lot of the list is very. See
Yeah,
what happens in Nigeria is we're 3 years off from the election. Everybody will, and what's going to happen in the next year, in 2021, maybe 2022, you're going to see posters pop up for everybody and their uncle.
Right.
Everybody and their uncle is going to run for president. You may even see my poster. Who knows? But
Hey,
you're going to see. Why not?
Why not?
You're going to see a lot of posters. But what really happens is that these things are arranged in informal settings and meetings. People meet and they discuss. So many of the things that we're seeing in the public, in the media, those guys aren't necessarily the guys who are being chosen behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to know what those closed door meetings have yielded until closer to the election. Then you'll see who's coming out. But even the people being talked about now, they're a far departure from the leaders that we've had in the past. You have to remember that for a long time, Nigeria had coup after coup after coup, right, and military head of state after military head of state after military head of state. In fact, from 2000 onward, we actually had 2 military generals who were former military leaders as presidents, but Olusegun Obasanjo and Muhammadu Buhari, who were former military strongmen. So now we're moving into the era where we have civilians who were groomed and trained for leadership. Typically, many of the presidents were former governors. They governed a state. They were an executive governor of a state. So we've even started selecting better rather than selecting the strongest general who has the most support from the army. That used to be the prerequisite to rule Nigeria. Whoever could keep the army in line and had the support of the most generals became the president. So we're actually spoiled now that the names you just called out, those are very capable people. So we're actually spoiled for choice in Nigeria, which is a good sign.
So we have, the person that's been, I guess, has been kind of somewhat the example of how African leaders should conduct themselves has been Kagame. Like, what are your thoughts on Kagame?
Well, Paul Kagame, he has a lot of support within his country. He's done a lot for the country of Rwanda. There's more that can be done, but of course, more can always be done. Mm-hmm. Some policies and things that he implements can be questionable, but overall, he's done well for his nation. So Paul Kagame has done well, but like we said, no president is above criticism, and there are certain policies that makes one scratch their head in regards to Paul Kagame and some of his affiliations. But overall, on ground in Rwanda, the general consensus is that he's a good leader.
All right, perfect. Let's jump into technology. How is technology going to shape Africa in the next 10 years? Because, we have a lot of AIs coming around. So I wonder how like AI and whatnot, how is that going to impact Africa?
In the technology world, and this is back when I used to be an engineer, but you have something called legacy systems, which essentially is the older infrastructure that was there. Like, for example, in some states in the United States, they give legal monopolies to certain companies. For example, electricity generation in Virginia, Dominion Power, and that's also a very good stock to buy. It's only gone up over time. If you want to go ahead and buy Dominion Power stock, go ahead. That's a good stock to get. I own a few of that. So now Dominion Power has a legal monopoly because in order to compete in electricity generation, there's so much infrastructure that you have to set up that it would really be unreasonable to have people setting up their own electricity poles all over the place. It would just be madness. So now certain people kind of are given legal monopolies and they're at the center. So in Africa, it's very different. We don't really have anything at the center that's a legacy system. We can essentially build from scratch with the latest technology because there's nothing that we have to really dig out and replace. So with Africa, when it comes to alternative energy and different things like that, it's a very different situation because we're not building onto an existing system, an existing legacy system. We're essentially building at the core as opposed to the periphery. So Africa, any new technology, Africa can adapt rather quickly because we don't have to worry about the old infrastructure because much of the old infrastructure is simply non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start with the best technology and implement that with an easier implementation than if we had to build on top of an existing system.
I'm still now, as far as the monetary system, especially in West Africa, I'm still confused on where we're at with the ECHO. I know you're the banking expert. Like, where are we with the ECHO, and how is that going to impact the next 10 years in Africa?
Unfortunately, with the ECHO, Nigeria was let down by some of the other West African nations. Nigeria's vision for the ECHO was a wholly independent currency that was to be printed in Africa, controlled by an African central bank, and not pegged to another currency where you couldn't determine your own interest rates.
Right.
Unfortunately, some of the leaders from the other West African nations had a different vision and went along with France's vision for that currency. So many Africans began looking at that as exchanging the note instrument within the same problematic system. So the system is what was problematic, in that many of the West African nations don't directly control their interest rates. They don't print the currency, and the currency is essentially given to them by another nation. To put the ECHO into that same type of system greatly decreases the chances that those who aren't using the French currencies would rather not join, or if they do join, there's great caution in joining. So unfortunately, the West African regional currency through the ECHO isn't what Nigeria envisioned or plotted for it to be. Now, what Nigeria can do, Nigeria has two options. Nigeria can either get serious with the Naira and make the Naira what it was in the 70s and the 80s. There was a time when it took $3 to get 1 Naira.
You know, it's funny, not to cut you off. My friend was telling me how I think either in the early 90s or in the 80s, when he arrived to New York and he went into a bank and he told them that he was Nigerian. And like, they were like, do you want to open a bank account? Because I guess the Naira was so strong. Like, they were just
strong. It took $3 to equal 1 Naira. Just imagine that. It took $3 to equal 1 Naira.
Now we're at 360 Naira equal $1.
If you had 1 million Naira in those days, you had $3 million. Now you might buy a car for 1 million Naira.
Right, exactly.
So if Nigeria can do what's necessary. Pardon me?
No, go ahead.
So if Nigeria can do what's necessary with the Naira and get it where it needs to be, people will naturally want to use that currency because of its strength. Or alternatively, Nigeria is also positioned partway in between West Africa and Central Africa.
Right.
Now, Central Africa, if they decide to get a regional currency going, Nigeria could also join that bloc due to its proximity to Cameroon and Central Africa. So those are the two options Nigeria has. Get serious and strengthen the Naira to where it needs to be, which will naturally make it the regional currency or the African currency per se, or potentially look to the Central African bloc if and when they decide to launch their own currency.
Someone's asking, how did the Naira get devalued that much? Like, what happened?
Many people trace that back to the administration of Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, or IBB as he's fondly called in Nigeria. And there are certain external factors and certain policies that were pushed by certain world international organizations onto Nigeria in order for Nigeria to devalue the currency. There was a lot of pressure. And unfortunately, many of those policies were enacted, and that put the Naira into a downward spiral ever since. And also, too, we have to look at the fact that Nigeria, we were too reliant on oil. Before oil, Nigeria had a very robust economy. There was groundnuts, there was cocoa, there was palm oil, there was a lot of things. There was farming, agriculture, there were textiles. For example, in Kaduna, there were textile mills everywhere. Many of the clothing that Nigerians wore was directly produced by Nigerians. Now, when you get a kaftan made, typically they're more for the upper class, or you buy prefabricated ones that may have come in from outside of the country. So we let a lot of our internal industries collapse because oil at the time, and in the 80s, 90s, the 70s, actually, the population was roughly 50, 60 million people. And so the amount of oil was the same. Now we have almost 200 million people, 194 million last time I checked.
Wow.
It could be up to 2 million by the end of the year or early next year. And so there's about $100 million on average over time. There's about $100 million in oil that comes out every day on average. Sometimes it goes up, like during Goodluck Jonathan's regime. There was an oil boom, if you will. In this current regime, oil's selling a lot lower than it sold before. But on average, Nigeria makes about $100 million a day from oil. And when you have 200 million people, you divide that up, that's about 50 cents or about 235 naira per person per day. That's not a lot of money. But when you only had 50 million people and you had $100 million coming out, you can see it was a different situation. So Nigeria essentially started relying on a mono economy. Everything was based on oil. So about 10 to 15 years ago, almost 95% of the federal budget was based on oil alone, which is problematic. If we look at the budget today, one of the largest budgets that we've ever had, around 66, 67% of it is based on oil, which is a great departure from the 95 percentile that we were in previously. Now, ideally, we want to get that down to about 10 to 15% at the most. But that's coming. That's coming.
All right, so we got a super chat. Thank you so much, Diallo224. Will the other West African states punish Guinea, Conakry, and Ivory Coast for their presidents flouting the Constitution and running for third terms? I mean, can they really? Because we have ECOWAS, we have the AU. Like, what can they really do?
Well, the first question is, does the AU have a sword? Meaning, do they have an enforcement arm? No. So before we say, what can they do, we have to look at the actual mechanism. Who has the sword? Who has the army? Right? So now ECOWAS, to an extent, has a regional army that's oftentimes spearheaded by Nigeria. So the question is, what will ECOWAS, if anything, do? We have to look at, I believe it was Gambia a few years ago. The president there decided to sit tight. And ECOWAS essentially started rolling out the tanks and said, hey, look, you got to move. This is just
I think he's in Ivory Coast. I think he's in Ivory Coast. I swear.
You might be. So we have to look at the nation, because in some nations, you can change the Constitution and run as many times as you want if that's permitted by the actual Constitution. So now, if the Constitution of a nation allows for it, and it's procedurally done in such a way, then what outside nation can tell you how to run your nation based on your Constitution? So the question is, one, is it truly constitutional? Because if it is, you can't tell them what to do within their nation. However, if these guys are trying to morph into dictators, then that's a different situation.
All right. And
also, a lot of these presidents have connections to outside. And sometimes those outside connections allow them to operate in such a manner that's detrimental to their people. But because they're upholding the agreements they have with these foreign nations that are the true power brokers, these foreign nations prop up these governments and allow them to stay in power. So if there's ever some sort of push or these men are removed forcefully, the foreign powers will send money, resources, and aid to prevent that from happening, or they'll simply not recognize the new government. So it's a deeper question than what will West Africa do, because some of these leaders, they're not necessarily there for their people. They're there for outside interests.
So sorry about that. Sorry about that. Brother Jacob
No
Longwolf, I
problem.
just sent you the link. Go ahead and call in. Go ahead and call in. Guys, if you want to call in, the link is open. I sent the links in the chat room, Uhuru at searchforuhuru.com. Again, Uhuru at searchforuhuru.com. Send your email and I will send you the link and you can ask your question. Let's see here. What's the potential for biotech in Nigeria, for example, drug development and pharmaceutical manufacturing?
All right. Anybody who's ever been to Nigeria knows that there's a pharmacy on every corner, literally. And also, too, we manufacture many of the drugs inside of Nigeria. So the pharmaceutical manufacturing, pharmaceutical retails, and the pharmacy industry is actually rather booming. The only issue that we have sometimes is the scourge of something called fake drugs, where somebody will manufacture a pill that's supposed to do something, but the pill has no active ingredients. The pill is just essentially chalk. And so we have NAFDAC, and through Dora Akunyili, she did a very good job of cleaning up, rest in peace to Dora Akunyili, but she did a very good job of cleaning up the pharmaceutical industry, but there's still a long way to go. We have to still ramp it up. But that's an industry that's growing, and that's an industry that if you have the time and the expertise, you might want to look into investing in. Anything medical or medically based in Nigeria will be gold as long as it's done to international standards, because currently, Nigeria, many of the people, the elites, will travel outside of the country for medical attention. True. But it's more convenient to stay inside the country. So if they could stay inside the country, they would.
Shout out to Jacob Lone Wolf. So every time we have this discussion, the should Nigeria break up question comes up. Ebube, do you want to address that?
Well, Nigeria, you look at the rest of the world. You have the United States of America.
Right.
You have the European Union. Russia was its strongest when it was the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. So when nations are together and they have workable systems, rather than strong men holding them together, you don't hear anybody talking about breaking away. Now, the reason that you have America, as large as it is, America could theoretically be 50 independent nations or more. But nobody's talking about leaving America. Why? Because things work in America. The system works in America. You're better off being part of America than being Florida, the country of Florida, or the country of New York. You're better off being with America because America has a workable system. So what we as Africans need is a workable system in every single country. Because when there's a workable system in every single country, you don't have people talking about leaving the country.
All right. Jacob Lone Wolf, go ahead.
Yeah, guys, how are you doing, Ebube?
How's everything?
Everything's good, man. I wrote a list of questions, that I wanted to ask you, but, you answered some of them. So, that was good on you. But my question as a young fellow, because with what's going on around the world with the coronavirus, my first question is, how do you see the global pandemic impacting a lot of the African diasporans, particularly like living in the Western nations, and how Africa is rapidly going to grow during the decade? Because as you can see, I feel like the West is deteriorating, and particularly with the lack of manufacturing in the United States. So how do you see the global pandemic impacting the African diasporans, particularly the young people?
All right. Now, in Africa, for example, what's going to happen is many nations are going to start pushing for self-sufficiency, right? During the pandemic, for example, many big men, and that's what we call the rich elite in Nigeria, big men. Many of the big men were essentially trapped in Nigeria. They couldn't leave. So when they got sick, they realized that some of these hospitals, they wouldn't even send a dog to. So now the big thing now is a lot of governors, a lot of people who are big men are now saying, we need hospitals because if the nation is ever closed off, we're all trapped here in this nation together. So whatever we put here is what we have here. So one of the positives of the pandemic is that certain sectors that we used to export and rely on other nations to handle for us, like healthcare, for example, those are going to be taken care of, because now, once it affects the powerful elite in Nigeria, that's when things change. If, for example, there were no generators in Nigeria and the big men had to go through the blackouts like the common man, they would say we need to fix this because it affects us. But when you have a Meccano generator and inverters and you just see the lights flicker and you move on, you might not think that that's a big issue. So one of the key things that's happening is self-sufficiency is being pushed. Now, in regards to people in diaspora, this is an interesting time because for me, I normally go back to Nigeria every year for a month or two towards the end of the year for Christmas, especially when it gets cold here in the United States. It's good to see palm trees and feel sunshine. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that this December. So now I'm starting to look at it and say there may come a time when I might not be able to just go to Nigeria as freely as I do currently. So maybe I might want to potentially move back and make that my base and visit the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I probably have like maybe 3 more questions to ask you.
Go ahead.
So the second one is like, since the spread of COVID-19, right? What industries have been affected the most, and what industries are likely to disappear in the coming decade, or not decade, but like that are likely to disappear?
That's an interesting question. Now, currently, the hospitality industry is suffering.
Right. Hotels,
entertainment, lounges, different places of that nature are suffering.
So they're making it. So I think they're making it in New York. There's going to be a new law in place where you can't hold concerts at a restaurant. It's something weird. So if you're at a restaurant and if someone is having a live, they can have live. There we go. They can have live performances at a restaurant. It's just, it makes no sense.
Well, the thing is, for example, in New York, and I used to live in New York, Brooklyn. That's actually where I went to law school, Brooklyn Law School. But in New York, everybody's living on top of each other. You get into a subway car with 500 people. You're waiting on the platform. You're literally next to anyone from anywhere. You go into a restaurant. The restaurant sometimes converts itself over into, and sometimes you go into New York and the restaurant, you'd walk in, there'd be no tables there. And it's some up-and-coming act or someone who's semi-famous who's going through and it'll be essentially a concert hall, and there'll be 200 people packed in there. And now, to answer Jacob Lone Wolf's question, that may suffer. For example, Naira Marley had a concert in Abuja at ShopRite a little bit ago, and he got a lot of flack for that. So right now, a lot of the entertainment industry, and the entertainment industry is booming prior to COVID. Yeah. The Afrobeat industry was really moving along, the entertainment industry. And if you go to Nigeria, you understand the Nigerians at the end of the day like to have fun. They like to enjoy themselves. So there were lounges, there were gardens, there were places to go and sit down and really enjoy yourself. A lot of those are suffering right now, but ultimately I think they may rebound. I don't know for sure because we really can't trace the trajectory of the pandemic. For example, we're coming into cold and flu season. Unfortunately, the summer is winding down. And the summer is my favorite season. I love the summer. But the summer is winding down and we're going into cold and flu season. What is that going to do? How is that going to compound the current pandemic? Are we going to see numbers spike? What are we going to see? How is this going to turn out? So unfortunately, we just don't know. 2020 is just one of those type of years that everybody just wants to get through. There's been so many twists and turns this year that we can't accurately predict what's going to happen in the next 6 months, unfortunately.
In fact, they were saying that the coronavirus, the COVID, was supposed to scale back during the summer because the heat was supposed to get rid of it, but it's gotten worse. Exactly.
So that we see there, that prediction was made by people who are very studied and learned, and even they were wrong about something so basic as heat generally sterilizes things, but unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily the case when it came to the pandemic.
Absolutely. Particularly with me as a young African diasporan, I live here in Melbourne, Australia, right? So Australia has like a population of 25 million people. It's like a big ass country, right? So with how things are going, I feel like particularly my generation, obviously you're talking about the third generation of African leaders and how like the previous generations they were bad leaders. And I just feel like in my generation, this has impacted us a lot because universities are shut down, colleges are shut down, a lot of the jobs are not going to come back. So there's a there's a greater emphasis on my generation to basically create opportunity, and I think when you're in that situation, like where I am, it's going to create like this warrior spirit in me to like want to create change. And what I'm seeing where I live at is that people that look like me, we don't really control certain industries, which in turn affects us. So thus we're dependent on other groups of people to give us a job. So I definitely agree with you on that. My third question is, as the development of Africa is going to grow in the next coming of decades, should there be more of an emphasis for the diaspora to focus more on renewable energy such as solar systems, or should we be able to take advantage of the natural resources in Africa, even though, because like Africa, there's no really old infrastructure that we have to build on top of each other. So how do you think that we should focus on? Because obviously the world is moving to like a renewable solar energy, because like you see companies like Tesla and all that, how they're creating electrical cars and stuff. So what do you think about that?
Okay, two things before I jump into that question. It's a very good question. First question, what part of Africa are you from?
So basically, I was born in Melbourne, but my parents are from South Sudan.
South Sudan, beautiful country. A lot of resources in that country as well. Congratulations on you guys' independence. It was a long and hard war to get that. Okay, so that's the first question. And the second issue I wanted to note and point out is that I didn't say the second generation leaders were bad. I just said that within that group of leadership, we had some bad apples. Because some of those guys, as Dynas pointed out, came in after some of the good guys were taken out.
Right.
So within the second generation, we had a sprinkling of some of the bad guys. And that, to an extent, not some, we had a lot of bad guys. But not all the second generational leaders were bad. We had very high quality second generational leaders, just not enough. Just not enough. And we know that based on the results. Africa isn't as competitive as it should be.
Right.
So objectively speaking, we failed ourselves to position Africa to compete globally. That's the second thing. Now, in order to answer the question that you just posed, your third question, when you look at the Western nations, alternative energy is just icing on the cake. It's not the main system. It's just the icing on the cake. The cake are the legacy systems, the nuclear energy, the non-renewable energy. And so they can experiment and say, well, let's try renewable energy here and there because we're not depending on it. So Africa right now, we don't have a working model for a nation that completely relies on renewable energy. So any solution that comes will have to be a wholly African solution. And it would have to be from a government that's serious about implementing such. Now, in regards to some of the rivers, many of the rivers in Africa are dammed. Ethiopia, for example, is building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Well, they've already built it, and it's looking to really industrialize that nation. However, eventually, that's not going to be enough electricity to keep up with the demand.
Sorry to cut you off. Is that the dam that I guess they're having issues with Egypt because of along the Nile River? Is that the one you're speaking of, or?
Yeah, there were 3 Nile rivers.
Right.
Well, currently there's only 2 left. There was the Yellow Nile, which dried up thousands of years ago, and then there's the Blue and the White Nile. One of them originates in the Ethiopian highlands and flows down. The other one flows up through Uganda, through Sudan, all the way up to Egypt. But most of the Nile's water comes from Egypt. And this is actually what's really changing the power dynamic in Northeast Africa, in Eastern Africa especially, is that for a long time, Egypt has been the regional power in that area, especially since they're attached closer to Western Asia. They've always had to have a very strong military. So they've had a strong military, which they've kind of used to bolster their position. But with Ethiopia controlling the Nile, Egypt completely depends on the Nile. So now part of the problem is that Egypt is looking at Ethiopia and saying, if you control the flow of the Nile, you essentially control our nation. You can essentially turn off the water to our nation, which will change the power dynamic of East Africa in Ethiopia's favor. So Egypt is going to have problems with that because Egypt's essentially a boundless desert. Only 3.2% of that country is habitable. And the only parts that are habitable are the parts along the Nile River and the Delta. If the Nile River ever disappears or dries up like the Yellow Nile, Egypt essentially won't be a country that it is today. So yeah, Ethiopia and Egypt have had long issues over who truly owns the Nile. And if you check out Up Close and Center, I have a short documentary, an episode on who owns the Nile. It's actually titled Who Owns the Nile. So once again, if you haven't subscribed to Up Close and Center, make sure you go to Up Close and Center and subscribe for all the geopolitical analysis. But Jacob, to get back to your question, once again, it would have to be a wholly African solution to use alternative energy as the central part of energy generation. So far, there's no country on the planet that's doing that. So it would be an African nation stepping up to take that burden on itself and come up with a blueprint that potentially other African nations can follow. However, even if we dam every river in Africa, it's not going to be enough to generate the demand, because by the end of this century, by 2100, 83% of the world's population will either live in Asia or Africa, meaning that Africa and Asia will be the center of the world.
Right.
There's not enough rivers in Africa to dam, and there's not enough sunlight to really generate and create a manufacturing base of any sort. So Africa still needs traditional energy generating, potentially nuclear, and other forms to act as the center, because at present, no one's come up with a solution that puts alternative energy at the center of their power generation.
Yeah, well, thanks, for answering that question, because, that's what I really wanted to know, because, with how things are going, sometimes, industries change, and the thing in Africa is, still developing. So I think that there should be a high emphasis on like agriculture and like developing natural resources. So I have two more questions. My fourth question.
One second, Jacob. Guys, make sure you hit that like button again. Please hit that like button, you guys. Hit the like button. All right, go ahead, Jacob.
Okay. On the agricultural side, right? When in terms of like natural resources, should we as diasporans, because I believe that this whole pandemic is probably going to spark a mass exodus in the next coming of decades with how things are going. Should we as Africans dominate, particularly like when it comes to the agricultural sector of the country? Like, what I mean by that is like when it comes to like natural resources, a lot of the times African nations, we give all our natural resources. We might sell it to other nations, but we don't manufacture it. So should there be a high emphasis on manufacturing our natural resources and our products, and should we be the high end user manufacturers, meaning that should we manufacture everything that's from our country and sell it to the open market so we can make the most profit that will and thus help control and make us stay in power of like our country and stuff like that? It's kind of a weird.
Pardon me?
It's kind of a weird question. I went off board.
No, it's a great question. That's actually a great question, because it brings up the point of what makes a nation rich and what makes a nation poor. On this planet, this particular planet that we live on, some nations are rich and some nations are poor. Now, the difference between poor nations and rich nations is actually a very good book on it. The title of the book eludes me, but I read it recently. But the difference between what makes a nation rich and what makes a nation poor is that poor nations merely export raw materials with little added value and little processing. And rich nations take those raw materials and process them. And in the processing, they hire people to process it. They hire people to move it. They add wealth into their nations before selling a finished product. oftentimes at prices that many of the nations that exported that raw material can't even afford. So now you take cocoa from Ghana or any other place in West Africa, and you get it for pennies on the pound. You now take that and you process it into chocolate bars, and you sell each of those chocolate bars for $1 or $2. Do you understand? So the nation that was able to process it had a factory that they set up, and people worked at that factory. People transported it. People, so many things. There's so much value along the value-added chain. And then they sell those back to those nations, and many in those nations can barely even afford to buy what left their shores. So now you see how nations are kept rich and some nations are kept poor. It's in processing and adding value to your raw materials. So what you brought up was a very good question. If some African nations want to remain poor, or they're put in a position where they merely export raw materials, then those nations will continue to be economically poor. However, once they begin to add value to those products, those nations can now add value and keep the wealth within their nation. So, for example, Nigeria for the longest time has been generating wealth for other nations by selling unrefined crude oil, meaning the oil comes out of the ground and it's immediately shipped off to be refined and processed and turned into other products, which are then sold back to the country of origin.
Yeah, absolutely, like that's what I wanted to know, because particularly with me trying to basically repatriate back to Africa, that's one thing that I want to tap into, is like the agriculture aspect and be the high end user manufacturer, where like I can sell on the open market as a product. My last question is that where do you think we as people historically went wrong, and to put ourselves in a weak end state throughout the world? Because we used to be a people of power, we used to be a people of strength. It all goes back to Kemet, where during that most Western scholars will call the Egyptian Empire. We ruled the world for 6,000 years, and then after that it was the Arabs. They ruled the world for 1,000 years, and then now it's basically the white Europeans that are ruling the world. And as you can see, what's happening now, China is basically going to be the next superpower of the world. Where do you think we as people went wrong, and how do we gain our strength and power as people once again?
Well, I wouldn't say China is going to be the world's superpower. They may be a superpower contender, especially if they can get the One Belt, One Road initiative done. Then they essentially take trade away from being in the seas, which benefits America, to now being over land. And China is betting on the fact that between Asia, the European Peninsula, and Africa, there's enough people there that if trade by land is efficient, then it creates an ecosystem where they can dominate, because America dominates their seas. You have to remember, America became a superpower by having a global military, essentially dominating and guaranteeing world trade, having a global trade system, and having a global currency. So America created that system, and it was easy to follow America's system. So in order to be a superpower, you need an accompanying system. And so, for example, we talked about what African nations can do. We look at Dangote's refinery that's being built in Lekki. That's really going to help, because it's now going to put Nigeria in a position where they export a finished good rather than merely exporting crude oil. But to answer your question, where we went wrong as African people, the problem is we didn't have a code as African people. And when I mean a code, I mean a code. A code is based around a system of thought, speech, and action towards a general goal. So now, if I want to dominate you, let's say my people want to dominate your people, my people first have to get on code, which means that our thought, speech, and action, everything we engage in, is to strengthen domination of your people. So now, before we do anything, we ask, how does this affect the system of dominance that we currently have? See, we as Africans have never really gotten on code with each other because we didn't look at each other as our group. When we were colonized, they didn't come in and just take us over. You know how hard it is to come in and defeat a bunch of African men? You know what they did to us? They went to Europe. They had something called the Berlin Conference, and they got on code. They said, what we can do is we can go there as a group, divide and rule, get them to fight each other. And after they fight each other, we'll supply the weapons for them to kill each other. Once they kill enough of themselves, and you have to remember, men fight wars, and it's men that keep society safe. So if it's just women and children and elderly men, I can now come in, use the superior weapons that I didn't sell to you, because I knew in the back of my mind, eventually I'm going to dominate you people, but let me let you fight each other first. And so we as Africans, we still had the tribal mentality, where we said, your tribe 100 years ago conquered us, and now we're paying tribute to your tribe. And now we have these guns from these Portuguese, and we can stop that, and we can kill all you guys. And the Portuguese said, hey, take as many as you want. Just give us some of your gold. So we were funding our own destruction. So now a lot of Africans, unfortunately, now we've just realized the game that was being played on us. And we're saying, my goodness, how did we get so far behind? And so now Africans need to get on code with African empowerment, which means our thought, speech, and action needs to be towards that goal. All Africans.
Yeah, that was my, last question. You answered most of them. I want to thank you. And also, the other day I think last week I was listening to Dr. Cabon. He was basically talking about, it was either Dr. Cabon or Louis Major. They were talking about like a Black nationhood. So I know that was my last question, but do you think that, obviously you talk about the Berlin Conference, how the Europeans basically, they divided up Africa into like these countries, right? Do you think that we as Black people worldwide, no matter which country you're from, you may be from Ghana, Sudan, particularly not just Africa, but like places like the Caribbean, like Haiti, and like there's a lot of major Black populations in South America. Should we basically come in code as a Black nationhood, regardless if you're on the continent of Africa and in the diaspora, where we dominate certain industries and we could sell it to, we can be the supplier to basically sell our products from where we are in Africa to other diasporans that live in other countries, and then they could sell that off to other people, and we spend the money within our community, and thus it allows us to create other industries, because that's how I see it right now. Because the other day when Dr. Cabon or Louis Major were talking about, they're talking about a Black nationhood. Do you think a Black nationhood is best for African people worldwide during this time in history?
If we look at the teachings of the Honorable Dr. John Henry Clark, he talked about having such an ecosystem, right? Now you look at the Asian community. The Asian community in America, for example, they go out of their way to do business with themselves. They go out of their way. If they're going to spend $1, it should be spent with somebody who looks like you. Because if I spend my money with you, that means you're going to have an overabundance of business, which means that you're going to hire people. And chances are you're going to hire within your community. So now if you hire within your community, you give more money to your community. So now those people who just were hired in your community have more money to spend. And if they have more money to spend and they're on code, they understand the power of $1 and they spend that dollar in their community. They only strengthen their community, which is genius. See, we as Africans globally, Black people all over the world, we don't treat our dollars as carefully as we should, because we don't understand that money is actually power. Not in the sense that I have $1 million and I'm this millionaire. No, money is power in the sense that I can use this money to create a system and keep that money bouncing within my community, as Dr. Claude Anderson discussed in Powernomics, a very amazing book. I would suggest anybody read that book if they have a chance. But we keep that money bouncing within the Black community. So if you realize, you know what? Nobody likes being ashy. So we like shea butter. We go to Ghana. Ghana has shea nuts. We now take that. We either set up a processing plant there or set it up wherever. But if it's Black owned, we process that, and Black people see, wait a minute, if I support this Black business, then they're going to have to hire more people, because they're going to have to buy more product to meet the demand. And if they hire more people, they're economically empowering more people that look like me and you. And by doing that, they're now creating whole industries. Because if you own the natural resource, you should naturally dominate it. If you own the resource, you should naturally dominate it. If you own the resource, you're a fool to not be dominating that resource if you own it. Because if you allow someone to come in, process that raw material, add value to it, and then sell it back to you for 10 times what you sold it to them for, what type of person are you at that point? You're behaving foolishly. So like you said, yes, the minerals that come out of the ground that we stand upon, we need to dominate those industries.
Wow, Bube, because like with me, thank God, I woke up early at this age because, as I see with a lot of African people in the old generation, how, they somewhat put us in this position. I feel like it's just like a matter of time before we become a people of great power and a people of like wisdom, and it just boggles my mind because like when I read that Africa has all these natural resources, it actually makes you proud to be an African and the culture, having like our amazing culture and where we come from, and the fact that we're poor is just like, to me, it's unacceptable. It's like I just don't get it, and I just feel like during this decade it's going to be a great opportunity because I feel like with where I'm at, particularly, I think the advantages that we as diasporans have in the West is that we're able to be in certain industries where we get paid a lot, not a lot, but we get paid a substantial amount of money. But I think with us is that where we live at in the West, if we try to create an industry or something like that, it'll be highly competitive. And I think in Africa, there's really not that much competition, depending on which country you're at, where you're at. And I think that, if you can go there and you can create opportunities, I think you put yourself in an economic advantage. And that's how I see it.
You bring up a very good point. You look at the fact that someone will leave China or Lebanon or Pakistan, come to Nigeria and do business and live in Nigeria. The competition in Africa is very low, to the point where someone can come from another country, I say Nigeria, but Africa. You see Indians coming into East Africa to live and work because the opportunities are so ripe that they're leaving their nations to come to Africa to exploit the opportunities. And it's only a matter of time for the diaspora. We get our act together and say, you know what, it's great to be here in America. But unless you truly own where you work, you're a high-paid employee. And that's not freedom. You have an opportunity to own and control something in Africa. That's freedom. Where if you want 2 months off to go on a vacation, you look yourself in the mirror and you say, can I pause business for 2 months while I go to the Seychelles or Casablanca or wherever you want to go? So you have those opportunities in Africa to actually transition from being a high income earner, a highly paid employee, to truly being someone that owns and controls something. And the competition. For example, I bring up the richest man in Africa that's on paper. Because as we know, there's a lot of rich people in Africa who don't want their names in Forbes, right? Who will go out of their way to ensure their name never shows up in Forbes. Mm-hmm. But the richest person on paper is Aliko Dangote, a Nigerian man, and some people criticize certain things about his business practices, but essentially, if you see where he made the bulk of his wealth, it was in flour, sugar, and cement. You don't have to be Mark Zuckerberg, meaning you don't have to create a social media tool that becomes hot fire and spreads all over the nation. You merely have to be the person who supplies flour, sugar, and cement, and you can be a billionaire many times over. So yes, a lot of us in diaspora are realizing it's good to be a high income earner. However, if I don't own and control where I work, then what am I truly doing? I'm just a high paid employee at the end of the day.
Right.
And it would make more sense to go where I can actually own and control something. And a lot of Africans are waking up to that reality as we speak.
Wow, yeah, what? The other day I was talking to Brandon, and he was basically saying, just go out there and do it, and that's just inspiring. Just to hear you say that, and particularly me as a young fella, what Dinah said, is that I think what we do as Africans is that we give our best years in the West and our worst years in Africa. I think during this decade, particularly as young people like me, I'm gonna put more on an emphasis on myself to give my best years in Africa and the worst years in the West. And what you talked about, certain industries and the low competition, that's inspiring for basically my generation or all people older for me to go up there and build. So, and I want to thank you and Dinus, for allowing me to be on this platform and, ask these questions. So, I can basically take action from now on.
Ebube, I appreciate you, man.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, Ebube, I appreciate you. I'm sorry, Jacob, I appreciate you, brother. I mean, someone your age. I mean, Ebube, he's only 19 years old.
Wow, only 19. Jacob, you better be in politics in 10 to 15 years. I better look. What's your real name? I know it's not Jacob Lone Wolf.
My real name is basically Mayor, May. It's basically like a Sudanese name. So
perfect. So yeah, I better see you in leadership position soon, because from these questions that you asked, I can tell that you're someone who's sharp. And right now, sharp leadership is what's needed on the continent. So if I don't see your name sometime this decade doing something in Africa, and you have to remember that many of the African leaders in the second generation took over in their 20s and 30s. Even in the country that I'm in currently, I'm in the United States. Some of the founding fathers were as young as 19. Many were in their 20s. These were young men doing revolutionary things. So don't ever think you have to be in your 60s and 70s to make a change in your country. The founding fathers of this country, many of them were in their 30s. Some were in their 20s. Some were teenagers.
Okay. Yeah, you bring up an interesting point before I go about the politics. I never thought about myself as, going into politics, because sometimes, it could be a rough game. But what would be your advice? Like, let's just say if I were to get into politics, particularly in my country, South Sudan, where there's a lot that needs to happen. My father is currently there in South Sudan, and there's a lot of poverty, but in terms of natural resources, it's rich in natural resources. So what would be your advice? If I were to get into politics, what would be your advice?
First off, there's no such thing as a poor African country. There are rich nations with poor people in it. Now, in regards to politics, what I will say is this: because you're 19, you're still young. What I'll say is you're in the West, and I take it that you're working. The reason that you're in the West is because the money you can make there is greater than the money you can make elsewhere, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead.
I was born here, so my parents immigrated here when I was born. So yeah, I'm definitely. Yeah.
What I'll suggest is this: when you go back to, how often do you go back to South Sudan?
Well, I've actually never been to South Sudan. I think the last time I actually left where I'm at was probably when I was 5 years old. We went to North Sudan because at one time Sudan used to be one country, and it was the biggest country in Africa, and obviously there was a civil war going on, where people from South Sudan got their independence. But I've actually never been to South Sudan, but my father is actually in South Sudan, and there's a lot of opportunity there that, he's
So you were in Khartoum?
Yeah, I was in Khartoum.
Okay. So that's an interesting situation because you were in a country that was one, and then the country was partitioned, and you haven't been to that particular region of your country, correct?
Yes.
Well, Juba is fast developing. Juba is a fast developing city, which is good because that means that you're starting from scratch, which means a lot of things need to be put there. So now what I would suggest for somebody like you is at the end of the day, you have to have money and you have to have some sort of wealth, because you can't make any change by being a poor person. You need to now first enrich yourself or find a way to get yourself economically empowered. Poor people, unless you aggregate a bunch of poor people on this planet are put in a position where they can't actually effectuate change on an individual basis. However, if poor people come together, then they can make changes. So part of the game that many of the elites play is to keep poor people divided. Because if the poor people rise up against those who are dividing them, that's an easy victory. So now the first thing you have to do as a man who's approaching your 20s is focus on wealth generation. You need to put yourself in a position where you control and own as much wealth and capital as you possibly and legally can. That's the first thing, because you can't truly make any change by being someone who's not economically empowered. So in your 20s as a man, you need to go out of your way to ensure that you economically empower yourself. Now, is that fair that only those who are economically empowered have the voice to be able to effectuate change? No, it's not fair. But the world isn't fair. Some people are born without the ability to see. Some people are born without the ability to hear. Life isn't fair. But what you can do is you can make life fair by economically empowering yourself. So spend your 20s economically empowering yourself as much as you can. Now, while you're doing that, you definitely want to visit Juba, or are you Dinka? Are you Nuer? What exactly are you in regards to that?
I'm Dinka, Dinka I think is the main tribe throughout South Sudan, so I'm Dinka.
Great, which means you have the majority on your side. So now what you're going to do is you need to endear yourself in South Sudan in some type of way, right? Whether that's going to where you're from and commissioning a borehole. You behave like a politician. What you're going to do is you're going to behave like a politician. You go there, you commission a borehole, you let the people know, hey, this is for this community. And you're doing good. And at the same time, you're getting your name out there. As a young man, not much is expected from you. So the more you can do in young age, the better. So you commission a borehole, you might give a community water. And so every year you save up a little bit of money. And every few years you go to South Sudan and you do something with that. You also preach the message of self-sufficiency. People will start to associate your name with self-sufficiency in doing things and having a heart for the people, especially since you don't have to do any of this. So now after you've done that over the next decade, because you are lucky, you have time. I would love to be 19. Actually, no, I wouldn't like to be 19 again. I'd like to be where I'm at. Mm-hmm. But being that you are 19, you have a lot of time. And people envy time because time is good. You can make yourself into anything you want in this life. So now you're going to spend the next decade, because your 20s are meant for you to be grinding and hustling and accumulating wealth and accomplishments, because a man is nothing but his accomplishments. A man is nothing but the sum total of his accomplishments. If you've accomplished nothing, that's how people will treat you. If you've accomplished a great deal, you'll realize you're getting treated very differently from when you didn't have those accomplishments. So what you're going to do is you're going to spend your 20s doing different projects in South Sudan that are going to endear the people to you. So now when your name is mentioned, people associate you with good things. So now in your 30s, not only do you have the capital, but now you look to get the socio-economic status. You now look to get your status up. Maybe you take on a position or an appointment, but you start lobbying within your country for an appointment with the government based on the body of work that you've put in. It's all about putting in the work. There's no shortcuts. So over this next decade, what you're going to do is you're going to put in that work. And after you put in that work, you're going to be 29, approaching your 30s. In your 30s, you now look to get a government appointment based on the work that you've put in the last decade. And you want tangible products, because tangible products are undeniable. And since they're undeniable, nobody can deny what you've put in. So now once you get one toe into the pool, which is the government, from there, use your talent to get the highest position with the most power and responsibility that you can. And once you do that, you'll find yourself, because responsibility is good. Responsibility brings power. So once you have that responsibility, you make sure you use it properly, and you're already there. So that's the roadmap for the next 10 years if you want to actually effectuate any type of change within South Sudan.
Okay, wow, I definitely, I'm gonna take your advice, and I'll watch this stream after it's done over and over, just to pretty much write notes on what you talked about, and I'm going to definitely apply it. So now I want to thank you, brothers, for inviting me to the live stream.
I want to thank you for your questions. Great questions. Phenomenal.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, brother. All right. I sent the link out to a couple more people. You guys haven't called in yet. We'll wait a couple more minutes. This is Mufasa Shabazz has a super chat question. Ebube, what would it take for a Black American involuntary diaspora to take political office in Nigeria? Is that possible? Has it happened?
Dennis, wouldn't you be better to answer this question?
I am actually trying to become in my local government. I'm trying to become head of the diaspora engagement. So I'm working on that on my end. We're going to see where it goes. Obviously, with COVID, it kind of has been delayed, but I'm working on it. So
to answer your question, yes, it can happen. You just have to, like Dinah said, just make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Things
may get in the way, but it's really up to you at this point.
Right. So I'm starting off with my local government, and we'll see where it goes. So let's see here. So guys, I sent the link out to a couple of people. We are waiting for you all to call in. If not, we'll start closing out. Everyone, once again, thank you for joining. Make sure you hit that like button as well, and please go join. Please go subscribe to Brother Ebube's YouTube channel, Up Close and Personal, everybody. So
Up Close and Center.
Sorry, Up Close and Center. Make sure you guys go subscribe as well. Up Close and Center.
You'll know you're there because the logo is black and the lettering is white. Up Close and Center. You'll love the content there. Everybody really enjoys the content, so you'll really appreciate it.
All right, let's hear. Ebube, will foreign companies in Africa have an advantage when the AFCTFA comes into existence? Do you know what that is? The AFC.
Africa Free Trade Agreement.
Okay.
Is that what we're discussing? Yeah. Well, with the African Free Trade Agreement, part of the problem is that was all pre-COVID. And right now, countries have essentially closed their borders. And now it's going to be a slow reopening up process. But here's what we have to ensure. And this is something that took so long. This is the reason that it took so long for Nigeria to join the Free Trade Agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, is that you don't want a weak country to become a dumping ground where foreign companies come in, they essentially dump their products there. They do one or two things, rebrand the product as coming from that particular country, and then flood the market with those goods. Because at that point, you're killing local manufacturing. So that is a risk. And that's one of the things that African nations are looking to avoid. So you brought up a good point. And that's exactly what African nations are looking to avoid is a weaker economy being exploited and becoming a dumping ground for foreign-made goods, because that defeats the whole purpose. The core purpose of the free trade agreement is if there's leather from northern Nigeria, it can easily go to Kenya to be turned into shoes, because Africa needs to start trading within Africa. And part of that, what we need to focus on is infrastructure. Africa needs infrastructure within Africa. And you have to remember that Africa's infrastructure was set up largely by the colonial system. And that system set up infrastructure to merely export unfinished raw materials. So all of the infrastructure is facing away from Africa. It's not facing inside Africa. So now what we have to also ensure is that we now, as Africans, bridge the infrastructural gap between our nations. Because at present, it's easier for a Nigerian to bring goods in from China than it is for a Nigerian to get those goods from Kenya. That shouldn't be the case. So one of the things we have to really focus on is internal infrastructure.
All right, Kaya, go ahead.
Hey, Ebube.
Baba Alpha.
Alpha, how you doing?
I'm dead now. What's
up? I have a full ground. Dynast. Bawani. Lafia. So Ebube, nice points, man. Been listening to some of the points you've been making. Really good. Kind of like feedback shared by the young man from South Sudan, and a lot of stuff to happen in that country. So in talking about it, I think I'll start from the last point you made, which is the free trade agreement. I've been reading a lot of different things about this, And you know, I've had several debates with some of my Nigeria friends regarding the benefits, and everyone focuses on the benefits and the Pan-African element in there about us trading more with each other and giving us more leverage, and countries like Togo not being able to negotiate with the behemoths like the United States, you know, or countries like Gambia not being able to negotiate with China, so coming together as a bloc. While that is true, you also have to pay attention to some of the potential risks involved in this free trade agreement, in the sense that, you know, you have what's going to stop Chinese people who are currently doing heavy business in Zambia, pretty much taking over the country, from benefiting from this. Now, some of them are nationals of Zambia, so they qualify as African, essentially. From saying, okay, we have a free trade area, ordinarily they might have gone into roadblocks into getting to the Nigerian economy. You know, of course, that's the mouth-watering economy for most nations in Africa. Now they have, you know, pretty much, you know, free reign. Now they could walk right in because they qualify as Africans. You know, and I've been thinking about this particular point. People could find this as a backdoor into getting into specific markets where otherwise you might have had tariffs or trade barriers that would have prevented them from getting into the countries, right? So that's the first point. You know, I wanted to get your thoughts as well on this, because this is the one thing I don't hear a lot of people talk about when they talk about this free trade agreement across Africa.
Right. It's one of those things. Anytime you open up a gate, right? Anytime you open up a gate, you're going to get the good and the bad, right? So anytime you open up the gates, you're going to get the good with the bad. Now, the issue is being able to filter out as much bad as you can, but bad is still going to come through. And that's one of the things that's just going to happen, is that you might have some people who move to the African continent. And as you said, they take advantage of a nation where they can qualify as Africans. They can start manufacturing in that country. And before you know it, it's manufactured in Zambia, but it wasn't by Africans. And then they flood the continent with these products that don't necessarily act in the desired manner of the agreement.
Correct.
That's going to happen. Now, the point is to mitigate that as much as you can, right? So what we need in Africa, we need strong systems to be able to mitigate that. Currently, it's up to every nation to set up their own system to mitigate that. But what's going to happen is, once we take flight and we see some of the problems, then we can proactively act. But because this is the first time in recent history, modern history, that we've seen such an agreement take place, there's certain things that we're just going to have to fix while we're flying the plane. We're essentially going to have to fix certain things. We're essentially going to have to fix the plane while we're flying it.
I know, yeah. It's one of those things. Yeah, it's unprecedented, and it's kind of like a pilot project on a large scale, right? We're going into this, 55 countries. Everyone's going to trade with each other. Do you recall when Morocco was trying to join ECOWAS?
Of course, that was 2018, 2019.
Correct. And they were,
didn't they get approved for ECOWAS?
No, they didn't. But if you recall, Morocco, sometimes they go through this identity crisis where sometimes they actually wanted to join the EU at one point. They tried
in the early 2000s. Correct.
So, and again, I'm not trying to stereotype North Africa or North Africans in this situation, but, they pick and choose who they are. On one end, they might be the Arab League when it benefits them. On another end, they want to be the AU. And I look at this and I'm like, yes, I see all the benefits, but I'll be honest with you, there's a huge part of me that's really worried, because I'm thinking, are we in effect in the ability or in the attempt to make ourselves stronger in negotiations? Are we in effect opening up the doors to the point where we could have an influx of all sorts? And I don't know. China takes most of the money back to China. There are Indian investors in Africa that take most of the money back to India. If this opens up and they benefit off of it, that money doesn't stay in Africa. And that's, so I guess you're right. I guess we'll see what happens and how it plays out. The other point, is this, Ghana is currently having their elections are coming up, and we are well aware of, the issues that Nigerians have had, especially with the traders recently in Ghana.
Unfortunately.
Now, I was talking to some people, also listening to channels this morning. There was some criticism of Buhari in the sense that he's been weak in handling this, because we have a lot of leverage over Ghana, and we can essentially shut Ghana down. I mean, Lagos has more population than the entire country, but we are taking a soft approach towards this and not really. Suppose Ghana has done this several times. Our missions were demolished, and some of those things, and I've been to Ghana several times. I've been to, Kumasi, I've been to Accra, I've been to the Cape. What are your thoughts with that as well? Because, obviously Nigeria and Ghana need to maintain a very strong relationship for the survival of West Africa. But at the same time, we've heard stories of Nigerians going there and being abused for far too long.
From my understanding, ECOWAS policy, whatever the issue Ghana was having with Nigerian traders, I think ECOWAS stepped in, and now those shops are allowed to remain open. Whatever, it has something to do with ECOWAS. I think Ebube will probably know more in detail. So.
Oh, really? I didn't hear about that. Okay. Yeah.
Well, the ECOWAS. See, here's part of the problem is that, there's policies and agreements on paper, but as we all know, there's a difference. For example, if you're pulled over or you're stopped by Nigerian police, you can show them the constitutional all you want, but there's also a set of law we abide by. So ECOWAS has agreements on the streets. Sometimes those agreements aren't necessarily honored until you escalate them up. Now, you have to understand Ghana's position. Ghana is afraid of becoming a Nigerian colony, right? Because Nigerians, you have, like you said, the entire country of Ghana could fit in one state in Nigeria, could fit in Lagos state. So now Nigerians are extremely competitive. And sometimes if you're in your home country and you have to compete with Nigerians, the natural recourse is to use your laws to protect yourself against basically domination, economic domination. And sometimes that's what they engage in based on what we've seen come out, which is unfortunate because at the end of the day, the agreements that we have where ECOWAS should function like a nation. So Ghana is a key ally in that it's one of the free West African states. It's freer. So Nigeria needs to maintain diplomatic relations with Ghana. But the demolishing of the embassy or the consulate or whatever they labeled it as, there's just been too many of those. And so Ghana needs to understand that Nigeria is their closest ally in West Africa. I've been to Accra, beautiful city, amazing. I've been to Tema as well. So what Ghanaians have to imbibe is the fact that Nigeria is your biggest ally. And so anything you do to one Nigerian, Nigerians as a whole will take offense to it if it's not done properly. Now, you raised another issue about Morocco that I want to touch on slightly. Now, if we look at it historically, Morocco, unfortunately, there was a time when West Africa was one of the richest, most developed, most powerful regions on the planet. You had Songhai, you had Ghana, you had ancient Mali, ancient Ghana, of course, which was more towards modern-day Mauritania before Arabs came in and attacked. So now, the people who led the expedition through the desert to strike at the gold mines, which was the basis of the economy of ancient Ghana, were Moroccans. And a few hundred years later, they did it again.
Correct.
Right? Unfortunately, Moroccans have come down and caused problems within Africa when things were going good. So now things are starting to go good again in West Africa, and then here come the Moroccans. So now you don't want to hold people's history against them, but at the same time, you have to look at things objectively. And shout outs to O'Shea Duke Jackson, handling it up, you know what I mean? But yeah, so in regards to Morocco, it was very interesting that Morocco wanted to join ECOWAS after being essentially turned away from the European Union. essentially leaving the African Union because of Western Sahara. And now they see things going good in West Africa. Like you said, the juicy market in West Africa is Nigeria and its 200 million people. And now they want to enter that trade bloc. Now that looks very interesting because before you were in the Arab League and you were trying to get into the European Union, and now you want to join the economic community of West African states. So to answer your question, yes, that looks very dubious. In regards to what's happening in Ghana, Nigeria is treading carefully, but at the same time, if Nigerians can be disrespected anywhere in the world, then that reduces the value of being Nigerian. If you're American and there's any little problem, even if you do wrong, like Michael Fay in Singapore during the 90s.
He got flogged.
Yeah. He went on a disrespectful spree and did whatever he wanted to. America said at the end of the day, he's still American.
Right.
Because Singapore had a law where they were going to cane him. Literally, they were going to take a cane to his buttocks. And America essentially said, no, that can't happen to our guy because he's our guy, even if he's wrong. Why? Because if the blue passport loses any respect anywhere, that devalues it for everybody.
Correct. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting thing, and you know, funny enough, during the term of Olusegun Obasanjo, you wouldn't see Obasanjo was well respected across the continent. You know, countries were scared to mess with him. You know, quite frankly, so you wouldn't even see this sort of situation occur in a place like Ghana. I think they even named a street after him in Ghana. Yeah, the president of Ghana named the street after Obasanjo. So it's weird because our closest brothers in West Africa, you know, there's a lot of history behind that. You know, the fact that, and I think I've heard Dinas make this point before in the sense that they treat Nigerians like this, but then you have the Asians that come in there and some others, and they don't treat them like this. They have their traders in there. They don't have a $1 million threshold for them to do business. They never created that, so it's disturbing when you see this sort of things. And the reason why I brought that up, because it ties back to the theme of this particular episode, which is, diasporans, and the future of Africa. I think a lot of education will make a huge difference in a lot of diasporans. I think creating platforms for business would also create, if diasporans could start trading in some sort of way with Africans on the ground. So you have whether it's Nigerians in America or African Americans that have a platform where they could do business with qualified being the key word, right? Nigerians on the ground in Nigeria, and they see it work, it will start to generate more of a travel piece to Nigeria, because now they're making additional money on the side. And that's something that you don't currently see now. And I think the Sudanese kid actually mentioned something about that as well, in the sense that trying to bridge that gap. Or was it, I've forgotten his name, the brother that spoke with that.
Jacob Lone Wolf.
Yeah, Jacob Lone Wolf. But then you also had the brother that resides in Ghana, goodness, a couple of days ago. What's his name?
That lives in Ghana. Lou Major.
No, not Lou Major. I can't miss Lou Major. No, not Lou Major. What's his name? Yeah, I think he lives in Ghana, doesn't he? He's African American, but
he's on the show.
He was on your show.
Dr. Gabon.
Dr. Gabon. He talked about this as well. Lou Major also talked about this. And I think, it's a key point in the sense that if that connection is made, it could be digital, it could be whatever. I'm not a digital expert. That's not my field. So, but if it's made, then you automatically have things happening without people having to step on the continent. But then you have economic interests that will draw them to the continent eventually at some point in time. And I think, that could be a future prospect, for African Americans and even Africans abroad, because African Americans are not the only ones that have this fear. I talk to so many Nigerians, and you won't believe some of the things they say about trying to do business in Nigeria. They don't even want to try it, right? So, and these are people that know better, right? So it's a challenge, not just for African American brothers out there, but also for Africans abroad. And I know it's one challenge that Obasanjo was trying to overcome, in the sense that he was trying to actively bring more diasporans back to Nigeria to do stuff. So maybe we'll see. I don't know. Who do you think wins the next election? Or who do you think will be some of the front runners? I think, you have I'm not sure if Nasir El-Rufai will run from Kaduna, or
Nasir El-Rufai said he wouldn't run for president because he says power should go to the South. But in Nigeria, it's not like that. 3 years in Nigerian politics is 20 years anywhere else. Like think about before Yar'Adua became president. Who knew him 8 months before the election?
Correct.
Nobody.
Yeah,
But
nobody.
he was part of the Yar'Adua dynasty and he became president. Now, what we have, for example, one opportunity that people in the diaspora have is that if you think, have you ever been to Abuja?
Yeah, I've been to Abuja.
Okay, great. That's where I'm based. Whenever I go to Nigeria, I'm based in Abuja.
Yeah. No, I love Abuja. Abuja is fantastic, man.
I love Abuja. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, it's a relief to be there. Compared to Lagos, Lagos, but the hold up and Lagos is like New York City. If you New York City is good to visit, not to live.
Yeah,
But when you go to Abuja, you realize that the airport is about 45 minutes from central area without traffic.
What's up, man?
Hey, what's going on, young man? Linus Jr. What's going on? So the airport is 45 minutes with no traffic to central area, which is essentially the urban core of the city. Now, the government a year or two ago just commissioned and opened up the light rail. It goes from the airport. There's several stops until it reaches the World Trade Center in Abuja.
Yeah.
Now, along that stretch of where the stops are, there's not much there. So now that's a huge investment opportunity to build high density around those stops. Because here in America, for example, anywhere that you have a light rail or you have a train system, wherever there's a stop, you see high density because people coming down from the train, they can go somewhere, and many people want to live by a train. Currently, many of those stops are essentially in the middle of nowhere. So now imagine having a 7-story building or a hotel or something along that line, along the Abuja light rail line to downtown from the airport. So that's a huge investment opportunity because along that light rail, you set up a hotel or anything like that, people who fly into the country can take the light rail directly to your hotel.
Correct.
So this is a huge opportunity for many in the diaspora to say, you know what, we're earning in dollars, we're earning in pounds, we're earning in euros. And right now there's a huge opportunity because Abuja isn't like Lagos. The problem with Lagos is bound by the sea.
Yeah.
You have the Atlantic Ocean on one side. And then you can go up, I believe Ogun State is after Lagos?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ogun.
Lagos is a very small state. So immediately after you're in another state. So it's bound by another state and it's bound by the Atlantic Ocean. And to further complicate things, Lagos is a series of islands.
Correct.
So you have 30 million people that have to squeeze themselves through 3 bridges every single day to move around. Abuja doesn't have those problems. Abuja is essentially flat land, and the topography, you have a few hills here and there. But Abuja can expand in almost any direction. And already in Suleja, it's connecting, and then up further into Niger State, it's going to connect. So Abuja is essentially going to become a mega city that spans the FCT and 2 other adjacent states.
Correct.
And so now the light rail, imagine being able to set up a hotel along the A train or the Q train in New York City. So now one of the huge investment opportunities would be high density around those light rail stops. And that's something that's underexploited, but it's something that everyone listening here should look into.
No, absolutely. And even Nasarawa State, which is right next door, it's not that far from Abuja. And I think, speaking about buildings, that's one thing, because a lot of African Americans, I've met a few that have expertise in actual building. And because of the local content piece, they just have to find and partner with credible Nigerian companies that are involved in that, and they could create structures in those areas you just identified that become immediate immediate gold pieces, because what happens is you have more and more people moving into Abuja for one reason or the other. There's so much stuff that goes on in that place, private and governmental. So you have a situation where there's a huge opportunity. Dennis, I'm not sure. Have you been to Abuja?
I have not been to Abuja.
Oh, he hasn't. He's gonna go with me though. I'm gonna take him.
Yeah.
I go Lagos straight to Osun State, and maybe
Yeah.
That is fine. Nigerian goes straight to Lagos. But he loves Lagos.
Nah, you have to just check out Abuja. Abuja is it's a relief. I was born and raised in Lagos as well, but when you go to Abuja, it's such a relief. Like, it's just the ease of moving around. Yeah, even during the Harmattan season, the dry season, it's cool at night. Like, it's really cool, and it's just like the weather is great. It just has a different vibe, man. If you grew up in Lagos and you go to Abuja, you feel at ease. It's like a weight's been lifted off your back.
Really?
I swear to you, because Lagos is so stressful. Like, when I go to Lagos, I have to literally plan my days. Like, I can't do 3 or 4 things at one time in one day. I have to do one thing at a time. Exactly. So if I have 5 things to get done for a week, I have to pick each day to do one because of the difficulty of travel. If I'm in VI and I say, okay, I'm going to the mainland, I'm going to Ikeja, I'll pick one thing.
Trip. That's your whole day is gone.
That's the whole day.
That's what you got to do. You got to leave around 10 a.m. and then you got to come back either like around 3 or 4 at the latest, or you got to come back at 8 o'clock.
There you go. Yeah, 8:30 now. That's your whole day. Yeah, it's gone. That's the thing about Lagos, and it's so frustrating. But you go to Abuja, everything is just okay. Boom, boom, boom. You're doing everything. It's beautiful. You have National Mosque. You have the National Church. It's just yeah. And now they're building. I just hope the violence in Kaduna stops, because with the train they've built to Kaduna is another place that could possibly become something. If that violence, if they're able to control that situation, Kaduna could be special. So absolutely. Hey, Ebube, keep doing your thing. Dinus, thank you so much for having me on. I don't know if anyone else is trying to call on or not.
Let me see. I think, let's see here. Yeah, you're the okay, here we go. We got one more call. This will be the last caller. Love Pirata. You'll be the last call, and then we'll close out.
Okay, I guess when he calls in, I think the Ivory Coast situation. Just before I jump off, is also very interesting.
Take your time.
Yeah, because Ouattara. It's interesting. Ouattara has a French wife, right?
Does he? I
believe he does. And I was looking into what they did to Gbagbo, and it was interesting. Pretty much the French just forced him out. That was a coup orchestrated by France.
Oh, you're talking about the coup. You're talking about the coup. Like, was that like
2012, 2011?
Yeah, 2011. Yeah, Laurent Gbagbo. The French soldiers were on the ground in Abidjan.
Right.
And it was interesting. And then they installed Ouattara. He won the election. They claimed the election was fraudulent. Okay, whatever. But then they forcefully removed him and placed Ouattara. And they arrested him. Mm-hmm. Gbagbo got arrested. And there are a lot of stories. A lot of it is rumors, so I can't really say some of those things. I don't know whether or not he got arrested for one reason or the next, because he was trying to reduce France's control in Côte d'Ivoire.
I want to say there's like video on YouTube of the French forces like executing people in Abidjan.
I know they were on ground. That I do know.
On ground, they were on ground. There's like video of like French forces in Abidjan, or like in somewhere in Côte d'Ivoire. I want to say Abidjan, like literally shooting Côte d'Ivoirians like in broad daylight.
It's possible. There was actually, I've forgotten his name. There was an American congressman, a Republican, that went on the floor in Capitol Hill to speak out against this. By the time the U.S. didn't step in, and he was speaking out against France's control in West Africa, and it was a major issue. The openness in which they just went in and removed Gbagbo and installed Ouattara. Now Ouattara has been in power. His term is up. His next in line, had health problems, I think, and then all of a sudden he stays and he wants to go for another term. So that's what it's looking like right now, and I don't see anyone possibly challenging him. And
And you see, part of the problem is, once again, in Africa, we play those strongman politics as opposed to installing systems where the person has to stay in power, regardless, he has to be there. And like you said, he was essentially put there. And you have to realize that many of the West African nations that are French speaking are still, there's a heavy presence of France in their politics.
Correct.
So if France doesn't approve of the leader, chances are the leader is going to either be removed or have problems. Historically, it's just the truth.
It is.
So you look at Cameroon. How long has that president been in power?
Yeah, Paul Biya.
He's in the good books of the French.
Yeah.
So because he's in the good books of the French, he's able to stay.
Yeah. You know, Paul Biya, Omar Bongo was one. The list goes on and on. There are so many guys. Yeah, they've been in power forever, and you know, they've just been pretty much. I guess during the colonial times, they used to call them indirect chiefs. These chiefs that were placed to control the local populace and working for the colonial governments. It's the same thing essentially. It's just in this case, you have people that were installed. You know, Paul Biya has been in power for close to 40 years now in Cameroon.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane.
And you know who he has the support of, right?
Who's that? Outside of France?
Well, he has the support of France.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So if we're talking about, you know, people being able to stay past term limits and things like that, once again, if they have that external support, you try to remove them, then you're dealing with additional problems.
Correct. And Kagame has done fantastic work. You mentioned earlier in Rwanda, but one of the criticisms I've heard of Kagame is that because a lot of his money has come from donors, you know, primarily countries in the EU post the genocide, he does make some decisions for Rwanda, but then at the same time, you know, his funding and his support financially comes from Europe. So he's in a way subservient to them, for lack of a better term, and he has to also do their bidding. Now, whether or not that's true, as far as the criticism is concerned, he has been able to deliver in terms of infrastructure, education. All their UN metrics and indices have gone up. You know, in terms of gender equality, Rwanda has better gender equality than United States, and this is according to.
And the thing is that we as African men, we've never been intimidated by our women to the point where we've had to suppress them and keep them down.
Correct.
It's not African mentality. Like we look at our women like, hey, you know, we look at some of our greatest teachers are our women.
Correct.
Because a lot of women obtain wisdom. Men obtain knowledge. Women obtain wisdom.
Correct.
And so your knowledge sometimes is incomplete without wisdom on the side. To complete your knowledge. And
Correct.
wisdom is incomplete without knowledge. So
Yes.
we've never looked at our women as something that we've had to dominate and control. We've always given opportunities to our women. So that's an African tradition.
Correct. Our women have always had a level of power. You know, people try to make it seem otherwise, and I always point out to them that, hey, look at Ghana. The revolution behind the golden stool by the Ashanti was led by a woman.
Right.
What is the about women's rights? What is the about women's rights?
Yeah.
The women said, listen, you know, we're going to fight against the British, and this is what we're going to do. And the men said, cool. Let's get it done. The men were doing their own. The women said, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do it in our way as well.
Correct.
So women have always, in most cases, been given the full ability to have proper lives. But however, external forces have changed that in some ways. But we need to get back to the African tradition of understanding.
Yeah, no, external forces have changed to a certain degree when they came in, and those external forces have been mainly tied to religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity. Speaking of which, the global chart I saw, and this was it was broken down by the experts at Davos. So, you know, and it was based on a couple of different metrics. But what I did see was that the countries that had the worst gender equality records were predominantly North African and Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, of course.
You know, I mean, just abysmal. And again, I'm not saying this to offend anyone. This is fact. Anyone could go on and look up gender equality metrics online. You will see it. So yeah, very interesting stuff.
All right, brother. We appreciate you coming on.
My man, thank you so much. Ebube, take them easy, man.
Always a pleasure, brother. Always a pleasure.
All right, bye.
Yeah, go ahead, Lovely.
Hi, Dynast and Ebube. It's nice hearing from you guys. So I'm in the healthcare field, and I'm really interested in leaving and going to Nigeria. I've been trying to figure out like where I can get started. I'm in terms of like, you know, I don't want to just show up and say, hey, here I am. I want to, you know, be progressive and see what opportunities are out there, especially in the pharmacy field. So do you have any like ideas where I can get started, where I can start researching?
Hey, you'll be more than welcome in Oshogbo and Otoruo. You're more than welcome.
Okay, so those are like states?
They're in Osun State.
Oh, okay.
Which is about I would say with no traffic, probably about 3.5 hours outside of Lagos.
No traffic is key.
Yeah, no traffic. Yeah, no traffic. About 3.5 hours, no traffic.
Okay, because I had plans on going, but you know, Corona happened, so I'm gonna try again next year, and you know, maybe focus on maybe retail pharmacy or even pharmacy in the healthcare, in the hospital setting. So I think this
And
might be
Lovely, are you Nigerian diaspora or are you Black American diaspora?
Caribbean diaspora.
Caribbean diaspora. What I would suggest is, what city and state do you live in?
Right now, I live in California.
Northern or southern?
Oakland, California.
Okay, shout outs to the Bay. All right, within California, if you want to get into any African nation, the best thing to do is to link up with those in the African diaspora because it makes things 10 times easier.
Mm-hmm.
So now, do you have anyone that you know within the African diaspora?
I can probably ask around.
Because that would be key. Because here's the first thing you need to do before you even enter, before you, like you said, before you step foot. You don't just show up to Africa and say, I'm here, and people are playing drums and celebrating your return. What you do is you link up with the Africans that you know here, because at the end of the day, you need Africans that you can trust. The last thing you want to do is get discouraged because you trusted someone that you shouldn't have. So now what you're going to do is you're going to get in contact with the Africans that you know here, that have people on the ground that they trust. And what you can look into, for example, and every Nigerian understands this example that I'm going to put out. But if you're in Lagos or anywhere else in Nigeria and you're looking for a wheelchair, it's hard to find a wheelchair in Nigeria, right? Now that seems it should be pretty common. But most Nigerians understand that if I tasked them with finding a wheelchair, it would be very difficult. So there's certain key fundamental health-related items that simply aren't there. So now it would be your job as someone in the health. Me, I'm an attorney, so I don't do medicine. That's not my purview. That's not my wheelhouse. But someone like you who understands medicine, you understand the things that people need in that field. So now in that field, you now say, okay, you find some people. I'll use Nigeria as an example. You find some Nigerians and you say, okay, what's needed in Nigeria? What medical supplies are needed in Nigeria? And there's a long list of them. And people will pay big money knowing that they got something imported from America to Nigeria, especially the elites who need these medical supplies, equipment, whatever it is. So now you find some Nigerians in the United States that you know and you trust. And so you set it up with them, and it'd be good to pull them in and bring them in and have them financially invested. So it's not all your money. People care where they spend their money. So now you bring them in and you make them bring money. In fact, it would be best to go half. So now you find them, they find someone, they have someone, family member, someone on ground, and you can start fulfilling the needs. You can say, hey, look, what medical items, what blood pressure checkers, different things like that. What what is needed right now that we can sell. So once you get your first taste of money, where you send something to Nigeria and you get that capital, that'll do something to you. It'll let you know, wow, there's money in this country. So before you even set foot on the ground, you want to be making money within that country. So now if you follow those steps, you find someone who's serious and like-minded. Hopefully you have some African friends and they have family members or people they can trust on ground who you can be sending things back to sell and repatriate that money. Now, from that money, you can decide, you know what, let me take a trip and actually go to Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Enugu, Kano, any one of these cities, and then you go there. And once you go there, you're going to see that because you're unique to you, nobody can be like you. Nobody can see life through your eyes. So now you see life and you say, wow, this place is mixing X, Y, and Z. And what type of healthcare professional are you?
I'm a pharmacist.
Exactly, which is great. So now maybe you go to a few pharmacies. You go to the National Hospital in Abuja, and you might see that this place is not staffed properly. It's not equipped properly. It would be nice if I could send X, Y, and Z there. And so that's what you look into. You focus on that. You focus on the direct need, and you supply the need. And then before you know it, you might be making enough money to quit working for somebody else and start working for yourself. And so once you get enough money going, you might say, you know what, let me go ahead and open up a pharmacy or something. And my pharmacy is going to be different because most of the things that come in are going to come in from the United States. And Nigerians, when we know quality is there, we'll pay. As long as we know it's quality, we don't mind paying the price. There's a lot of wealth in Nigeria. And you can tap into that wealth, and before you know it, you have a successful business that's wholly your own. So that's how you would start. You would start by finding someone here that you trust, that have people on ground that they trust. And then from there, you would send them equipment that would be sold. And once that money starts coming back, you can now say, okay, what else do I need to do in regards to sending things back? Once things get good, you take some time, you plan a trip, you go out there, you see things with your own eyes, other ideas will spark, and you proceed from there.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, lovely. We appreciate you. And I'll respond to your email too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dinus and Ebube. Take care.
Take care, lovely.
All right, y'all. Well, what we'll do, we'll go ahead and close out. Ebube, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm going to say, everybody, go ahead and go to Up Close and Center. Up Close and Center for top quality geopolitical analysis that you'll find nowhere else. Make sure you go to Up Close and Center and subscribe, and let's build a better Africa.
All right, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, family, Dynasty Search for Huru. Peace.